Hey guys, Z-Dog. Welcome to the show. We're going live. Instagram. I don't do Instagram that much. You know why? Because I'm old. Old people just don't like Instagram. We're like, what, the pictures? But I don't look good without a beauty filter. I don't want a picture. How are you guys? Come on in. We're going to talk about India, which is a complete disaster. Like, we got to talk about that. And then we're going to take your questions about coronavirus, masking, the CDC, anything. You guys, I go completely unchained on Instagram. And I'll try to save this so that we can put it up on Facebook or somewhere else if we so choose. Welcome in, guys. What's up, Ashley Stewart? Ashley Stewart's a supporter. By the way, one quick pitch. Come join our supporter tribe, zdogmd.com/supporters. We do live shows in high def, like every other day or something. And it's a dope group of people. All right, that all being said, here is the deal. India. So this is the understanding that I've been able to ascertain from attending a Stanford Grand Rounds where they had doctors from Pune, India, which is, in fact, my family's ancestral home. Both my parents are from there. They went to medical school at the same institution in Pune where the physicians were that were speaking via remote to the Stanford Grand Rounds the other day, talking about the situation going on in India. Pune is a small town in India of like over 3 million people or something, and is one of the epicenters of this in Maharashtra state. Can't talk today. I'm having a stroke. And epicenters of the second COVID wave that they're having in India. And it's also like a center of, it's kind of like their Silicon Valley. There's a lot of tech there. It's a really kind of interesting place. I've been there. And for people who haven't been to India, you should understand this. It is one of the most, it's a fascinating place. These folks are not other to us. Like, they are us, just in a different place with a different culture, right? So I want to put that up front so that when you see and feel the kind of suffering that's going on there right now, it feels like it's happening to you and your community, right? Because in a global sense, it is. So in India, there's so much wealth disparity that, you're either middle class or rich and have servants, or you're the servant. Or worse, you make a homeless person in the United States look like Elon Musk by comparison. That's what strikes you about India, is this disparity. And so in the first wave, now people have been predicting from the beginning that India was going to be a complete, like the worst in the world train wreck, right? And they confounded everybody with the first wave. It turns out that they did these rather aggressive lockdowns early on that preferentially hurt the poor, as lockdowns often do. But in India, that's a life-threatening thing because they're barely surviving. And now you reduce mobility and do all that, and everything that happened. But what they found was that the first wave really affected the poor, people in the slums of Mumbai. There were some ascertainments that up to 60% of them had been infected, but the death rates weren't that high. Now, remember, in India, the infrastructure is not really designed to properly capture a lot of this. And so it's probably underreporting even in the first wave. So the first wave may well have been considerably bigger than the second. But the difference in the first wave is the poor who were sick and dying in that wave nobody cares. That's the tragedy of India, the truth and the tragedy of India. So, if it's politically expedient, they can be sacrificed in favor of everybody else and so on. And so it wasn't a huge wave, at least that was reported. And then they started to open up again. People stopped wearing masks. And they sort of declared victory, like the Prime Minister Modi was like, hey, we did this. Everyone thought we were going to be screwed. We're the best. And the theories were, and actually I thought this might have been true as well. And I said this on videos early on, that there was some natural T-cell immunity, that because Indians are used to living in dense environments with a lot of pathogens around, that they might have more innate immunity. They might have even been exposed to similar coronaviruses and not known it. And so, and others kind of shared that sentiment. Like, could they have reached a herd immunity then with less death because of this pre-existing resistance to dying of this thing? They're a younger population overall, being in the developed world. They're younger, so maybe less death because of that. In the first wave, mostly elderly people were dying. And so this younger, presumably less chronic disease, like, this kind of thing, and then innate immunity is what spared India. And they were basically declaring victory. When the prime minister started holding political rallies, Hindu festivals started happening, huge groups of people throwing off their masks, and you have the development of the UK variant, which is more contagious, and you have a failure to vaccinate the local Indian population. They have 1% to 2% of their 1.4 billion people vaccinated. So you have all these things starting to build. Now, what's interesting is India is a powerhouse of exporting generic drugs, exporting vaccines, exporting oxygen. That's what they do. And again, for those Americans who are watching this who are like, India, who cares? It's a ghetto-ass third world place. Yeah, except it's actually not. So their healthcare infrastructure is two-tiered. You have the healthcare public infrastructure for the poor, and then you have everybody else. You have their industry, which is world-leading in many things. You have a highly educated English-speaking workforce. And it's the world's biggest democracy. So if you want to go in a rap battle between China and India in terms of who you ought to be rooting for in the world, you ought to be rooting for India because they're a democracy, right? They're going to report when people are dying if they have the data, whereas the Chinese will just hide it, which according to crematoria data probably did happen. So if you look at how many, what was going on in the crematoria versus what Chinese official estimates were of deaths, they're not really comparable. Now in India, so you have this, this population that has been having a burgeoning middle class, a lot of wealth disparity. Ever since economic reforms in the 90s, it's blown up economically. And so now you have this kind of haves and have-nots in India. 1.4 billion people competing for resources. It's a warmer climate, but it's very diverse. So you have lots of different states throughout India that look nothing like each other. And this then is what I think is going on. And I'm basing this on what the doctors were saying from India and other stuff in terms of their current experience, which we'll get to. So you then started having what classically happens in a second wave. This happened actually in the 1918 flu pandemic. The first wave knocks off the vulnerable and the elderly. And the second wave comes back and for some reason aggressively infects the young. Now, that's what we see starting to happen now. So the age, according to these docs, the age demographic has shifted to like 30 to 45 from what was before elders. Now, still elders are still dying, but this is a big shift. We think that population is healthy, but they're actually not. Indians, if you hang out with Indians, if you know Indians like me, every single one of us has a little bit of visceral fat, may not show up as a big pot belly, sometimes it does. But because many have adopted a more processed diet, a slightly more westernized diet, there's a lot of undiagnosed insulin resistance, diabetes, and what they call skinny fat, where you look skinny, but you actually have a lot of visceral fat, which leads to insulin resistance, inflammation, and it's a powder keg for when something like COVID infects, because that's when you get the cytokine storm. If you want to learn more about that, I interviewed a South Asian Indian doctor, Ron Sinha, a couple times on my show, talking about why inflammation and a tendency to insulin resistance and these metabolic syndromes put you at so much risk for coronavirus disaster. So now you have a second wave, which the scientists in India were predicting. They're like, well, this is going to happen, so we should do something. But even they were blown away by how quickly it happened. And this is why I think this is happening. And others agree, and some don't think this is the case. We know that coronavirus is over-dispersed. Over-dispersion is a fancy way, I did a video on this, is a fancy way of saying there's some, it isn't spread equally by everyone. There are super spreaders and there are random events. So it has a stochastic component. Stochastic is a fancy way of saying random component to it. So you have The political stuff going on where the big rallies are happening. You have the people, tons of people dipping themselves in the Ganges and Hindu festival. And then you have a few super spreaders throughout those millions of people. In an unlucky event, they start to spread, combined with no distancing, not wearing masks, even if they're outdoors, crammed together for long periods of time. That's a recipe for spreading the thing. And it's not like what we're talking about here in the US, taking our masks off outside, which I advocate. Throw that shit away. It's not what we're talking about here, where you can distance, where you're not in each other's face for long periods of time, and where you're vaccinated, right? This is India, where you're not vaccinated. They're this close for long periods of time in these festivals and rallies. You now have these super spreader events, and then people go back to their home villages, their hometowns, etc. And at that point, you have exponential growth. Now, it's even faster than in the first wave because the UK variant is pretty strong there. There are local Indian variants that have some mutations that just may make them, we still don't know enough about it, may make them more transmissible, and maybe even more transmissible to younger people. And so then you have a perfect powder keg of a population that's kind of done with it, like distancing, masking, forget it. No vaccinations, barely. I mean, let's say 2% of a 1.4 billion population is no vaccinations, all right? And crowding events with new variants. So what do you have? What we have now, which is numbers that went boom, through the roof. And they were not, their healthcare infrastructure is, again, it's two-tiered. The top tier is some of the best healthcare in the world. Smartest doctors, amazing equipment. And I know this because I have family that's treated there. And then you have like the public system, which is rickety and falling apart, but it still manages. It manages barely, not really. So there's a huge disparity, and now it's all overwhelmed. So now everybody's getting sick, a lot of young people, they're out of oxygen. What the doctors were describing they're seeing is, again, much younger people who are, showing up later because there's no beds, who on radiology actually have much more severe looking films. And they're actually using CT scans as screening because the RT-PCR doesn't come back fast enough. So if you're trying to triage, just throw them in the scanner real quick and look at the lungs and go, oh, crap, yeah, okay, I think we have the diagnosis. Now, remember, this is a population that's been exposed to tuberculosis, may have some lung scarring and things like that already, some of them anyways. And so they're used to kind of looking for weird stuff, right? They're really good at like these strange pulmonary presentations. But what they're seeing now is pulmonary emboli all over the place, clots, both the usual suspects and crazy clots like iliac artery clots, strokes, DVTs, just crazy stuff. And that's all compounded by the fact that ICU, critical care, has not been a board-recognized specialty in India for more than 7 years. So it's a maturing field, that specialization. Otherwise, you know how we used to do it here. It's all generalized and everybody does a little ICU. And that's only starting to shift in India. So if you watch on the news, you see what's going on. It's just crazy chaos. Take the worst situation we had in the US and New York or whatever in the early days, or LA in the latter days during our third wave, and it pales. It's nothing compared to what's going on there. They don't have medicines. Now, again, does remdesivir help? Dexamethasone, for sure. Oxygen, yeah. Proning, probably. The idea that you're trying not to ventilate everybody. And remember, once you're ventilated, it's not like that's the end of the story. It's the beginning of an ordeal. So multiply this by millions of people. And they're saying, 300,000 cases. Dude, multiply that by 5 or 10. I know Ashish Jha was just recently quoted by saying, it's, probably 3 times higher. Try 10 times higher. Do you think, my mother was telling me, she's like, you think people dying in the villages, anybody notices, catalogs it, or cares? Look at what's happening with the crematoria. That's how you know what's really going on, how many people are dying. It's probably 1 million. And what does this, okay, and on top of all this, again, now who's going to vaccinate? It's already so behind. They're big on AstraZeneca there. They also have, they're working on getting the Russian vaccine. And, the doctors are just besides themselves. And, you know, and they're giving world-class care. I mean, they're capable of world-class care, like same as the U.S. So this is a huge issue. And if you think it doesn't have consequences for here, you're wrong. Because when you have a 1.4 billion human petri dishes for the virus to replicate in, you're going to get more and more variant generation. Now, I doubt that you'll have true immune escape from the vaccines, especially the mRNA vaccines that are very powerful, but it's gonna risk that, you know? And so what lessons do this tell? Okay, first of all, how can you help? There's a New York Times article today with a bunch of links that tell you how you can contribute. So you can donate to, there's a series of nonprofits and NGOs and things like that that actually do things. You know, obviously the US government's talking about getting AstraZeneca vaccine and vaccine components over there. This is a pointer to why vaccination was so important, and also not giving up on mitigation too soon. But look, second waves are going to happen. They're going to happen no matter what you do, unless you're in a draconian lockdown like China's, which no other part of the world can do, because we are freedom-loving democracy people, including the Indians. It's just not going to happen. So you're going to have a second wave. We have a vaccine. It's now a preventable illness. That's what we should be focusing on. Let's imagine, which is not true, let's imagine that these vaccines have side effects and adverse events that actually hurt people at some rate. Even if they did, right? And if you look at Johnson & Johnson, it's like 1 in 100,000, 1 in 250,000 may have this type of rare blood clot. That risk-benefit analysis, when you look at India, is still 100% worth it, right? Because that same person could easily die of COVID when you have a situation like India. In India right now, if they had put as much effort into vaccinating their population, this would be much blunted, much blunted. And it goes to show what happens when you get a second wave, a legit second wave, without vaccines. So anybody who's like, well, we didn't even need the vaccine or whatever, you can shut the hell up. Because all you got to do is look at India. That's it. Don't look at any. You forget about the U.S., which already should have proven the point. But India can tell you that you're wrong. Now, what's happening in the U.S.? Cases coming down, deaths coming down, hospitalizations coming down. Yes, it's spring. It's warming up. That's a piece of it. People's behaviors, though, I don't think they've gotten necessarily better. So except after the winter surge, maybe they self-modulated a little bit. It's the vaccines plus existing immunity. That's the major driver of the improvement in the United States. That's why my friend Marty McCary says we're going to have herd immunity by the end of April. Well, tomorrow's the end of April. And honestly, we're pretty close, I think. Forget the word herd immunity. That triggers everybody. We're going to have a stability because herd immunity is a changing target. Depends on the environment that changes, the weather that changes, the transmissibility of the virus that changes with variants and things like that. So the decaying of natural immunity and things like that. If it happens, we don't know yet. We don't have enough, experience under our belt. And so really the vaccines, if you look at Israel, what happened in Israel, just look what happened. The numbers just went, they vaccinated about half of their population and a bunch of other people already have immunity from natural infection. It's crazy how quickly it improves. They're taking off masks and stuff. It's nuts, right? It really works. So that's there's so many lessons from India, right? And I'm hoping that one of these lessons isn't that what happens in any part of the world happens to us, because we should have learned that lesson when a civet cat or whatever emerged the virus in Wuhan, or it came out of a lab, or whatever you want to believe, right? So that's the main thing I wanted to kind of talk about with regards to India. Now, one thing that those doctors said on the call from India was, when they look at the people who are showing up to the emergency department, 98% of them did not get vaccinated. And there's a small percentage of them that have been vaccinated with AstraZeneca. And maybe they've had one of the doses instead of the two. And they were saying that those guys are not getting that sick. One of the other things they said that was rather tragic is many people felt they actually got sick standing in line for the vaccine because they weren't mitigating, and they got sick shortly after, before the vaccine had a chance to kick in. So the actual vaccination lines in India could have been a super spreader event, and many patients were anecdotally reporting this information. So again, you got to get your shit together. Let's see. Hi, prayers for those in danger, says Angel. Thank you to everyone who's sending badges. Let me thank you guys and see if you guys have any. Cosmorley, Cynthia, Bad My Girl, Cam Carney, Suze Warwick, Beth Anilon, Lola Okada. Oh man, there's a lot. I'll just thank you all in theory, en masse. Thank you for supporting the show. Okay, so back to questions. Let's go here and see if I can find the questions. Here we go. Okay, why are they not showing up? They're white text against white backgrounds. Let me click on one and see what you're okay. You can receive questions, but you can't show them on the screen. Okay. Do you feel comfortable eating indoors at this point, says Singing Foot Doc, who can't wait to see me in Vegas. I'm going to be doing my first in-person live performance in Las Vegas for the American College of Foot and Ankle Surgeons at the Mandalay Bay, May 18th. And I'm super fucking excited. I really am, because it's going to be great. I mean, they're going to be wearing masks, and there's going to be distanced and all the other stuff, and because it's indoors, but they have good ventilation. And the general prevalence is low. All these guys are vaccinated. Get vaccinated. Open the hell up, right? So do I feel comfortable eating indoors? I have felt comfortable eating indoors the entire pandemic whenever the restaurants were open for indoors, because that meant that the local community prevalence was low and they were distancing at the tables. As long as there's good ventilation, that's the main thing, right? But right now, I feel incredibly comfortable because me and my wife are vaccinated. Am I worried about my children? No, because the community prevalence is low and they're low risk for getting very sick from it. Could they get sick from it? Sure. But do I panic about, other respiratory diseases that they can get as children that can be harmful? No, I don't. We have to live our lives. We take risk and benefit. I'm not so into the culture of safetyism that I want to put them in a bubble. Now, if I thought their risk was higher, then I would change that calculation. So that's my answer to that. Singing Foot Doc. Now, let's see. Are vaccines helping in the U.S., Badass Warrior Goddess? The answer is 100%. Absolutely they are. There's very little doubt. Because, you saw initially in the winter surge, that's when vaccines were just spinning up. So they weren't having a big effect. But it's a combinatorial effect between vaccines and people who've been naturally exposed and warming weather. So they absolutely, and what they're going to do is prevent a resurgence. That's the main thing. Even if there are variants, these things are pretty good with variants, especially for severe disease and hospitalization and death, which is what you really care about. Next question. Sans Condiment says, is it safe to send my 6-year-old to summer camp, Pittsburgh, PA? Okay, I cannot do a risk calculation for your 6-year-old, but I would say this. My 9-year-old has been going to camp since the pandemic, since they've allowed it at all. And they wear masks inside, and it's like a Ninja Warrior camp. So that's what I do for my child, because again, her risk of getting very sick, and she's 9, her risk of getting very sick is very, very low. And her risk of transmitting to me is also rather low, but it's even lower now that I'm vaccinated and my wife is vaccinated. So I would say if you're vaccinated and you're not, the risk calculation changes quite a bit, because then it's like, well, and what's the risk of not sending them to camp? Insanity, right? Am I right? Are you with me? All right, let's go to the next one. Excuse me, COVID. Pfizer coming out with an antiviral pill. Thoughts, Hella Ashley. Well, pharma's going to do what pharma's going to do. They're going to try to make pills and potions and stuff for something that's hopefully going to be cured with the vaccine. But there are going to be some people who don't get vaccinated or can't get vaccinated or whatever. and there's still going to be disease, and there will be some breakthrough even through vaccines, which we see. So it's good to work on that stuff. I will believe it when I see the data that says it actually helps. It's kind of like remdesivir. It's kind of like, does it really do anything? Does convalescent plasma really do anything? Probably not. Ivermectin, well, love to see better data. And then, years later when you do see the data, you go, that shit didn't work at all. And that's the problem. We've never had great antivirals. So I'm glad that it's lighting a fire under people to develop them. It'd be good if we developed good antibiotics too, because that apocalypse is coming. Let's see. Okay, yeah, those are the existing questions in the little question box. There might be more now. Let me open it up and see if they are. Oh, yes, there are. Hold on. God, man, Instagram's real glitchy with these questions. Avidaemi says, is Modi focusing on fixing this massive issue in India with regard to poorer groups and younger populations? This is a great question. So there was recently an Atlantic article by a writer who was Indian who is from Bhopal, India. For those who remember the Bhopal gas tragedy, it was a Union Carbide plant that leaked a toxic gas chemical that killed about 6,000 people documented, probably 3 or 4x that in reality, because we don't document deaths of poor people in India. And he said, what they're seeing with the crematoria there now in the cremation areas is like beyond an order of magnitude of scope of what happened in the Union Carbide gas. And he goes on to talk about the wealth disparity in India and how the first wave affected the poor, so no one counted them, no one cared. They shut down even though it hurt the poor. They did all this. Now, and this is a quote from his piece. He says, the rich or the middle class are clutching their pearls as they watch their loved ones die without ambulances, without oxygen, without hospital beds. And for the first time now, it feels real to them. They're seeing it. They're putting a face on it. They all know somebody who's died, who's been sick. It's the disparities there are tremendous and tragic. Now, what can Modi do? I mean, I have no idea, but they certainly haven't done anything before. So it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening, and I'm not as savvy on Indian politics. All I know is, when I was there, you bribe every official to get past a road, so hopefully that bureaucracy is cleaned up some more, but I doubt it. Let's look at some more questions here. And let's see, here we go. How about thoughts on the vaccine in pregnancy, says Sarah HC. So this has already been weighed in by the big obstetric groups, Maternal Fetal Medicine Society. They all say that any risk of vaccine, which has not yet been documented in pregnant women in terms of actual risk, is outweighed by benefit, because COVID in pregnancy is not good. You're at higher risk for everything. So my take is, for example, and it would be my wife's decision, but if she were pregnant, I'd be like, you better get the vaccine, because you don't want COVID when you're pregnant. So that's my take with that. Personally, I think there's not that many people that I think shouldn't get the vaccine. Like, I'm not in the Joe Rogan camp where he's like, if you're a 20-year-old and you're healthy and you're exercising, you shouldn't get the vaccine. It's like, if you're a 20-year-old and you're healthy and you're exercising, you're not likely to die of COVID. This is true. But you can still get a case and spread it to other people, including people who are vaccinated, but the vaccine, they're one of that 10% that it doesn't take. So it's not, there's externalities with vaccination that have to do with the population. Now, if that young person were at high risk of vaccine complications, for example, if the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, you're a young woman and the risk were more like 1 in 5,000, how can you in good conscience ask a young woman to take a vaccine that could 1 in 5,000 give her a fatal or life-changing blood clot so that you can protect the community? Then it makes no sense, right? So that's kind of how I think about it. Now, how do I think about kids? I think 16 and over so far, you make the same argument that you would make for young adults, because they can potentially transmit and so on. 16 and under, it's kind of like, you're going to have to convince me you're really going to have to show me some data that that population is at risk. I haven't seen it. And transmits a lot. Haven't seen it. Like, am I going to vaccinate my 9-year-old? Not unless you show me data that convince me otherwise. Because even the side effects of the vaccine, meaning the fevers and the muscle aches and the chills, why would I put her through that if there's no real benefit at all? So I would wait till she's older. There's just no reason to do it. That's my calculation. Now, you can argue that I'm wrong, but that's how I do the math on that, right? Now, you could show me new data if it comes out, and I'm convincible. But right now, and I think this is a problem with pro-vaccine messaging in general. It's as dogmatically one-pointed as the anti-vaxxers. It's like, no wonder they don't trust us. No matter what news comes out, you're like, but no, the vaccines are fine. No, how about you just be honest? Yeah, Johnson & Johnson thing, very low risk of blood clot. But man, it's there. So you got to be informed, and then you make a decision based on what you think is best. Here's how I calculate risk. That's how you do it. You don't go, oh, it can't be the vaccine, blah, 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 blah. It's, like right now they're looking at myocarditis in the mRNA vaccines in Israel. There's probably not a connection because myocarditis is very common. They're doing it out of an abundance of caution, but let's say there is. Then you look at the numbers and you go, okay, what's the risk? And you tell people, okay, the risk is infinitesimally small or whatever it is, like being struck by lightning. But here's what you look for, and this is, you should go in with open eyes so you can make a decision. That's all. Pausing a vaccine and all that's done is drop the vaccination rate because now everybody's terrified because humans don't process risk properly. That's really the bottom line. Wow, 29 people have sent little badge money. Thank you, guys. That's very kind of you. So let me see here. I'll get another question in here while we're at it, and then we'll talk a little bit about outdoor masking. Will you run for governor, says Smokin'. In California, we need intelligence and common sense and leadership. Well, since Newsom's getting recalled, I could easily throw my hat in. Actually, that would be crazy to be governor of California. I would sooner jump off the nearest culvert, which wouldn't kill me, it would just injure me severely, than be governor of this ungovernable state. It's not a state, it's a country. And it needs, there's separate areas that are so different. And, as much as I don't love Newsom, I don't envy his job, right? So let's see what happens with that recall. Man, we just need some damn common sense. Speaking of which, let's talk about the outdoor mask guidance from CDC. It's like, come on, guys. Really, Professor? Masks outside are a bad idea, generally, unless you're crowded in rallies and stuff? You're telling us that now? I've been saying that shit from day one. Outdoor masking is dumb. I'm just going to get upset for a second. I promise I'm not going to curse too much. All right. When I see like a dad pushing his kid on a bike and the kid who's like 3 is wearing one of those dumbass cloth masks, I'm like, this is child abuse. Like, what part of your common sense is missing that you're able to do that? Now, I get it because that's the messaging. That's what the government's telling you to do. You're being a good citizen. We're teaching people to not think critically. And it's nuts. We think there's this one size fits all. Kids in masks like that? That's outside? Why? All we're doing is discouraging people from going outside. I see people riding bikes with the masks. Are you high? Show me a documented case of someone on a bike not wearing a mask getting COVID from someone else outside. The transmission rate of outdoor COVID is infinitesimally small. It happens, but it often happens when people are crowded together for long periods of time and they're very close. Now, the reason outside stuff is so awesome is that you can be apart. There's an infinite volume of ventilation generally, and sunlight and UV and humidity destroy the virus. So why don't we, and then there's only now are people getting the reward for being vaccinated? You can hang out with other vaccinated people without a mask? Thanks a lot, Ace. Like, we knew that from day one when I saw that data on vaccinations. Now, I get it. I understand the CDC. I don't like to harsh on the CDC too much because their job is quite hard. But if I don't harsh on them, I mean, then, some ding-dong news anchor for, is going to politicize it. So the bottom line is we ought to be tearing our masks off outside, whether we're vaccinated or not, if we can keep a reasonable distance and we're not in each other's faces. If you're vaccinated, I feel like you should do whatever you want. Now, indoors, I actually still think we should be wearing masks. And the reason, except in restaurants when you can't and so on, the reason is it's a higher transmission risk. And we need to wait until our vaccine prevalence is high enough that we can say, okay, now turn the indoor masks off, right? Now, does that mean that you can't have little home parties with your vaccinated friends? Sure. Does that mean you can't have little home parties with your vaccinated and unvaccinated friends? Sure. The unvaccinated people know that they're at some risk. They're willing to take the risk. And the people around them that care enough about this hopefully have gotten vaccinated. If you care about getting COVID, like you're worried about it, and you won't get the vaccine, then honestly, that's on you. You're an adult, make a decision, your life, your body, your choice, go for it. But I don't want to hear you complain when you're ventilated, right? Or when you get a mild case of COVID and nothing happens and your risk calculation paid off, because that's more likely for most people. We have to be honest. Can't shame people. Just have to say, hey, take a personal responsibility for what your choices are. That's all. I'm starting to sound like a conservative. Risk versus benefit in all parts of life, says Taryn NC or Taryn C58. God, man, these Instagram handles, they got to go. I think that's part of the reason I don't like Instagram is it's all this kind of stuff. It's never like Bobby Jones, I have trouble calling people out. Let's see, David, Dargyle and 10 others sent a video request. I don't want to do split screen video because it screws up the audio retroactively for the entire video. It makes it real tinny. So I don't do split screens unless I'm planning to do it going in. So this time we're not going to do that. Let's see now. There's a couple questions here. Let's see. Nope, there aren't. Hold on. I thought there were. Oh, Ken Drapegao4, there's that Instagram thing again, says, thank you. You are the reason me and my husband got the vaccine. Okay, can I say something, guys? This is like one of the things that just lights me up. I've gotten so many messages from people who are like, I watch your show. I like that you aren't so crazy judgy and dogmatic. I got the vaccine because of you. And I'm like, damn, that's kind of awesome. Because if I didn't believe that vaccine was going to save lives and was going to end this pandemic, I wouldn't be so crazy passionate about it. Could there be one person out of all these people that has some adverse event that I don't know about? I don't think so. But even if that happened, I think I would feel bad, but then I would be like, this is the risk benefit that we calculate, because I know the risk of COVID and it is not so good, right? So that's kind of how I think about even the messaging of this stuff. We had on my locals group, which is zdogmd.locals.com. There's a paying tribe there and a free tribe there they're just great. They're just an advanced group of people, really great people. I love it. I highly recommend it. And I'm not saying that because I want your money. I'm saying that because I want you in this group if you're this type of person. So a person just signed up to be a supporter, and she wrote a big thing. And she said, because you can post there. Like, that's the whole thing, is you generate the content, and so do I. We're together, right? And I moderate it, but I've had to delete 3 posts in the entire history of the time that we've been doing local since December. It's crazy because people are just good. They're alt middle as fudge. So the person wrote, hey, it's interesting. I'm glad to be here. I love you guys for teaching me. I was a hardcore anti-vaxxer, like Del Bigtree, Robert F. Kennedy, Jenny McCarthy, the whole 9. That was my world. These were my tribe. This is what I believed. And I watched you and hated you, especially in the early days, because this is how you were. You're obviously the enemy, right? But then these little cracks, and it's like, wait, he's not entirely unrational. And every now and again, he's compassionate. And every now and again, and it's like, and then I started reading what what your audience was saying, and I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And now here I am saying I've gotten the mRNA vaccine. I've left those groups. I still have the questioning skepticism of the anti-vaxxer, and yet here I am to learn from you guys. And I was like, holy shit, you know? And I wrote back to her and I said, listen, it's not. I'm so happy. I said this message makes my month, and it's not because we converted someone to the cause. It's not because, you know, I can gloat that there's one less anti-vaxxer in the world. None of that. It's because there's hope that people are able to change their viewpoints on anything in the face of rational discussion from people who are assuming good intent from each other. And I told her, because she had said, I kind of want to tell all my old anti-vaxxer friends to come here because there's a lot of what you do that they would really love. And now it's easy to go, wait, what? Anti-vaxxers would love me? And get all triggered. But I was like, no, I know exactly what you're saying. They question not just, you know, the current dogma, but they question institutions. They question corporations. Should this be a thing? They question what they do to themselves. That's important. That's to be celebrated. Those are the aspects of the anti-vaxxer. These guys are more just vaccine hesitant, right? That we ought to be encouraging in everyone, right? And then if you combine it with good sources of information, you have educated people making risk-benefit analysis for themselves in a good way. That's what we want. That's the purpose of the Z-Pack, is to build this alt-middle integral way of thinking. So that's what I have for today. Tag your friends in this video. Do whatever it is Instagram does. I still don't understand the gram that well. And I'll share it up on Facebook and YouTube and all that. Maybe not YouTube because this format, they don't like it. Yeah, and I love you guys. I really do. If you want to join our tribes, you know how to do it. Just go to zdogmd.com/supporters. And you can also hit me up on, if you want to just like put a tip in the tip jar. And again, the reason this is important is it keeps us commercial free. Like I don't have to rely on sponsors. If suddenly Facebook dried up and there's no advertising revenue, I don't care because you guys support the show. I'm in your pocket. Go to paypal.me/zdogmd. And if you leave a comment or a question, I respond to every single one by email. Don't ask me personal medical advice because I can't ethically give it. It's not a good thing to do. All right, guys, I love you. And we is out. Peace. Yo, did you think that was dope? Hey, become a subscriber. Click the subscribe button. Then right to the right of his little bell. Hit that bell. Booyah! You get notifications. Never miss any of our stuff. I love you guys. We out.